Nature gives us everything. Beautiful glass of wine in a plate, that's about nature, coupled with craft. Our lunch, even a sense of wonder, comes from being in nature.
Hey folks, welcome to the latest episode of the You Can't Eat Money podcast. Every week, I say how excited I am about the guest, and every week, I mean it. But maybe this week, I mean it a little bit more. Melina Shannon-DiPietro is the executive director of MAD. I'm sure many of you are familiar with MAD, but for those who aren't, MAD was started by Rene Redzepi of restaurant Noma in 2011 to empower the global hospitality industry to create sustainable change and transform food systems for the future. And Melina's relationship with food and in the environment space actually starts prior to that, when she was the co-founder and executive director of the Yale Sustainable Food Project. She's a true pioneer when it comes to exploring the relationship people have with both the planet and the food they eat. This episode covers a lot of ground, from the MAD Academy that trains the hospitality industry professionals in leadership and environmental sustainability to MAD's foraging app and how we can create a more diverse and inclusive conversation around environmental responsibility and food. This episode is coming out on August 14th, and if you happen to be in the Copenhagen area for the Copenhagen Cooking Festival, please check out MAD's Young Alumni event called Palate Cleanser, the Ideals Restaurant. The event asks the question, would eating at a restaurant where the hidden costs of food are revealed still be palatable? That event is being coordinated by Ali Beveridge, a grad of MAD Academy's Environment and Sustainability program, and is one not to miss. Please also make sure to head to madfeed.co to sign up to the MAD email newsletter. Without further delay, here's the latest episode of the You Can't Eat Money podcast with Melina Shannon-DiPietro, Executive Director of MAD. Today on the You Can't Eat Money podcast, we are really excited to have Melina Shannon-DiPietro, Executive Director of MAD. Welcome to the podcast, Melina.
Thank you, Rick. I'm glad to be here with you.
So for everyone listening, let's just start at the basics. What is MAD?
MAD, as an organization, is a nonprofit, but the reason we exist is to influence the way we eat as a world. MAD works with everyone working in hospitality, and we want people to dare to make a difference, and we want to give them the skills and tools they need to make that difference. It might also be helpful to say MAD is headquartered in Copenhagen. It was founded by Rene Redzepi, the founder and chef of restaurant Noma. And the name MAD comes from the Danish word for food. So if you were a Dane, you would pronounce M-A-D as mel. So we pronounce it as an American or a Brit might, because we like that double meaning, that it's about food, but it's also about a wild enthusiasm. It's about an all-consuming type of passion, because that's very much how we feel about what we do. We love food. We love the people who work in it. We love the businesses and communities they create. We also love the potential and the ideas, as well as the impact. And, that impact is something we are here to accelerate and really help light a fire so that everyone working in hospitality can make a difference in their communities. And when I talk about impact, I think it's the area that you're also thinking about with your podcast. The impact we need to make. Food is related to 29% of greenhouse gas emissions, 70% of biodiversity loss. These are probably statistics other people on your podcast have mentioned, but we can help hospitality make a difference in these areas.
What I think is really unique as an outsider, having watched many of the MAD videos from the symposium on YouTube, and I'm a big fan of the MAD book, or the book from MAD with Chris Ying, You and I Eat the Same. All these different things say to me that MAD is looking at the overall sort of food and hospitality system and trying to work many different angles to achieve its goal of transforming, reimagining the food system. So when you think about like that theory of change that runs through MAD, how do you articulate that?
Absolutely. Often I think people want us to do one thing. They want us only to pay attention to the environmental side of restaurants. That would feel, or only to pay attention to food waste. That would feel like they could get their head around it. But in fact, life is complex. Running restaurants is complex. And a Maslow hierarchy comparison, or might be a better way to think about it. We have to get some fundamentals in place and we have to stretch. And so our theory of change is step back to where restaurants come from. Restaurants are about 200 years old. They come out of a tradition of apprenticeship and a tradition of craft. So people are educated in the craft, how to debone the perfect chicken, right? And to do it quickly, how to fillet a fish, how to pour the perfect glass of wine. But knowing about craft is different than knowing the leadership skills, the financial savvy, or the environmental stewardship that's essential for today's organizations. And so what we see is we provide the time and the space for people working in hospitality to learn new perspectives, new skills, practical tools that they can take home and provide them an inspiring network. They can make a difference down the road. And in terms of how they make change, I mean, the world is flush with examples of how chefs have changed the way we eat and changed culture. Think about kale salad. 15 years ago, a decade ago, no one ate raw kale salad, but a chef on the Lower East Side of Manhattan popularized it, and it kept rippling. Similarly with the new Nordic tradition coming out of Scandinavia, or Rene Redzepi serving moss on a plate in Copenhagen. These spread quickly, these ideas. And what MAD is giving the industry the time and space to learn is the essential skills for being great leaders for the modern world.
And so that segues into the MAD Academy really well. So can you explain what the MAD Academy is and the 2 tracks that exist as part of the curriculum?
Yeah. So MAD Academy was born just 4 years ago out of our real sense that our cornerstone and original program, the symposium, was incredibly important for bringing together community and incredibly important for inspiration. Yet we are also getting the clear indication from our audience that some evolution was essential, that people needed that inspiration and they benefited from it. Yet when they got home, they didn't have the depth of tools or the depth of knowledge to make change. So the Academy is a 5-day intensive that allows 40 plus hours of intense instruction, introduction to best practices, and that inspirational and practical network for the future that allows people working every day in hospitality from around the globe to come together and to go away with a plan for how to make a difference. I think tackling questions of how to be a better leader, whether that's about psychological safety or the financial sustainability of your restaurant, can feel overwhelming. It's particularly the case when it comes to environmental stewardship. People want to make a difference, yet they're not sure where to begin when they hear things like Paris Accords and Scope 1 and Scope 3 and greenhouse gases. What does this mean for my restaurant? Whether that restaurant is 30 seats or 3,000 seats spread over a series of restaurants. The people who come to our programs leave with a greater clarity of what counts and how to act on what counts. And that type of deep impact is what we're after with the Academy.
That's really amazing, because I think more and more some of the recent guests we've had on the podcast, Douglas McMaster of Silo, and I was actually just talking to a guy named Alex Francis from Little Red Door in Paris, and they are both thinking about how to combine kind of those 2 pieces that you're talking about, solid people leadership and people sustainability, along with environmental sustainability. So do those pieces come together, or are they kind of treated separately? How does MAD Academy approach sharing that knowledge?
Doug is one of our faculty members at MAD Academy. I admire his work so much. He's been a real source of inspiration to our program participants. I think I want to do even more of bringing those 2 areas together, Right now, we treat them as 2 separate 5-day blocks. So we now have people coming back after doing one of the 5-day sessions. They come back for the second 5-day session. You know, in the perfect world, maybe we would be able to have our groups of program participants together 4 times a year in person in different cities in the world. And yet right now in hospitality, the demand for labor is wild. People are reporting staffing shortages and have been reporting staffing shortages for 2 years now. And so we're really just tightening it up and giving them the foundational knowledge that's essential in one of the 2 areas each time. That's where our focus is, and we'll build the bridges more and more as we go forward. There's plenty of rich conversation that ties them together, even in the existing program.
And so zooming in a little bit to that environmental track, you mentioned some of the things that can be intimidating, whether you're an eater or a chef, front of house, back of house, these things can be quite scary for people who aren't necessarily familiar. So what does that sort of environmental education look like for someone who attends the MAD Academy?
2 things I want to just give as context as we dive into that. It's wild to think that in the US, right? You and I are both Americans, though we've decamped to other countries. In the US, 1 of 3 Americans has their first job in restaurants. And so if we think about restaurants as a training ground, then the impact of restaurants can be enormous. And you can also think about that translation between the server and the customer, as well as if someone comes to MAD Academy when they are 25 or 30, they've got a lifetime ahead of them to continue to make change. So that ripple effect is very important to us. The second piece I wouldn't want to lose and is really essential to our theory of change. I think it's very clear that we need new solutions for the future on all fronts, both environmental and economic. And there's appetite to do that, yet we are so fundamentally human. We're animals. We love things that are delicious and pleasurable. And that's okay. And it's part of the reason we need hospitality with us in this transition, right? That people working in hospitality, some of their skill set is about the craft of transforming raw ingredients into something delicious, the craft of creating nourishing experiences, the craft of creating joyful experiences. So if we're going to transition to a next level, which the world needs, is calling upon us to do right now, we need hospitality with us. Now, to answer your question, sorry, this part might have to be edited.
No worries. I think the 1 in 3 stat is fantastic. I was at an Outback Steakhouse as my first job, so maybe not quite near the halls of Noma, but it is a universal experience, near universal experience.
Near universal, and an incredibly important experience in the American economy in particular, but also throughout Western Europe, of onboarding immigrants and providing pathways for women into employment. In terms of what the curriculum entails, every course at MAD is about this empowering with new mindsets, providing practical skills and inspiration. That's the backbone. The work includes lectures, group work, case studies, field trips, all done with a bit of trademark madness. So no boring conference rooms for us. And our faculty come from a real diversity of backgrounds. So the Environment and Sustainability program is led by Ed Romain. He's from the Netherlands and was trained in philosophy and economics. But the lecturers include people like Doug McMaster from Silo on zero waste, Matt Orlando, formerly from Amas Restaurant on deliciousness, or the incredible Portia Hart on providing luxury, sustainable resort settings at Blue Apple Resort in Colombia. So there's also, set parallel to those great lecturers, there's a lot of exciting field studies. There's a research center our students visit. They see firsthand ice cores from Greenland, and that allows us to see climate change in action. There's also trips to the coast to see a seaweed farm, and a foraging trip that looks to strengthen our students' connection to nature. So overall, the week tends to be diverse, all aimed at building the individuals ability to choose to take responsibility and their skill set for taking responsibility.
And if you had to think about what a curriculum might look like if you reverse that. So for someone like me who just really enjoys food, what would you say might make up a curriculum for environment related to just your average eater?
I imagine they would be in some ways similar. You and I, as eaters and not as people in charge of restaurants, gotta say, I think we have less influence, right? So you and I can change our practice, we can change our family's practice, maybe we influence our friends. But the power that hospitality has is they influence how people coming in their doors day after day eat. And it turns out you can fix 3 leaky faucets in a restaurant. Fixing those 3 leaky faucets means over the course of a year, you save drinking water every single day for 1,200 people. That's really important knowledge in Sicily, Spain, California, even Denmark's drought conditions right now. Same time, a restaurateur could peel back the size of a burger. That is the equivalent in a 75-seat restaurant. That's the equivalent of taking 8 cars off the road every year. What hospitality has that you and I don't have is that ripple effect, or that broad ripple effect. At the same time, if I were going to create a curriculum for the general public, a starting point would be really simplifying an understanding of where we are and what nature is. So people get really and understandably frustrated with words like sustainable, environmental, greenhouse gases. Yet if we look around us, nature gives us everything. Beautiful glass of wine in a plate, that's about nature, coupled with craft. Our lunch, even a sense of wonder, comes from being in nature. So first, I would get people really comfortable with that idea. And then I would ask them to look where we are. I think we maybe have become a bit weary or wary of the changes that need to be made. And yet we're called on, we're in a special moment in time where our actions can make a difference. And that's worth stepping up into. I think about it in a football match. European here, soccer, in a football match, when there's a chance to make a difference, when the game is tied and you're close to the end of the game, you do not throw the towel in. You look around, you connect with your teammates, you figure out how to make a difference to win that game. And it's the same when you're in the service and you're in the weeds. You don't walk out the kitchen door. We're in a moment where the planet needs us and our future generations need us. And this is the time to step up. So certainly a curriculum would try to inspire people with that sense, and then go on to attack questions about extractive agriculture versus regenerative agriculture. It would help people get the fundamentals correct in their households, right? One of the things we do with restaurants is help them think about how to build, how to change energy consumption. Maybe that's about cleaning your refrigerator compressor regularly. But to get in order the different ways of making a difference that can be relatively simple.
Great start, I think. And one of my favorite things that I've found through following lots of chefs on Instagram is that the people who end up going to the Mad Academy is that they get sort of indoctrinated in this book club and brought in. And I see them sharing the books that they get. They have the Mad sticker on them. And I've actually bought many of them because I curated my own version of the Mad book club for my own reading. Thinking about that idea of curriculum for someone who's an eater and wants to be more environmentally minded, is there anything from the Mad Book Club that you would recommend they read to get that head start in that way of thinking?
Absolutely. I've read 2 books in the last few months. I'm still in process on one, but I think have been really powerful for me. One called The Ministry of the Future, and that the author is Kim Stanley Robinson. And it's a fictional account of a ministry of the future that's responsible for securing our future. It's a vivid accounting that asks us to use our imagination. The other book that I've found really meaningful is The Future We Choose, and that's by Christiana Figueres and Tom Kranick. And that also imagines us to use our future, but it gets much more specific on the types of policy changes and collaborative changes and economic system changes we need for the future. In terms of like it's not old school exactly, but a book that feels like almost a classic to me now is Dan Barber's book, The Third Plate. And I think that is a great book from a chef about agriculture and absolutely worth reading.
Great recommendation.
I feel honored that you're checking out the Mad Book Club. I'll look to you for some future recommendations for us as well.
Yeah, I can definitely send you a list of some of the ones I like. I would definitely put Dan Barber's book is fantastic. That was really my inspiration for getting him on the podcast, and was really excited when he agreed to do it. Taking some of these threads you're talking about, connection with nature, learning, getting people out there. One thing that I think is really interesting, and I'm going to not say this in Danish, I'll let you do that, but the app that Matt has launched around foraging is something that I found really compelling and really interesting as a way to connect people with nature. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the app is Vilmel, or Wild Food, we can just call it that. And you can download it by going to Vilmel, but it's available in both Danish and English. And what I love about this app is it puts in your hand, in your back pocket, while you're out for a walk, the knowledge of chefs and of foragers. And it gives everyone sight lines into a new way of thinking about nature. And, the app itself is really intended to harness the power of chefs to protect nature and influence the way the world eats. And it's not that we think everyone's going to be foraging in the future, but I think it is a way or that's not going to produce 100% of our food. It would be great if everyone goes for a little weekend foraging trip. But what we wanted to help people understand is that though we usually go to the supermarket for our food, its sourcing is fundamentally from nature. And so we need to take care of biodiversity. We need to take care of wildlands preservation or contribute to rewilding. And we need to pay attention to biodiversity.
When we look at sort of the educational aspect of that, there's the Mad Academy, which is doing that with chefs. There's this app, which is available to the public to kind of check out. I think I've read that the Danish government has actually helped support Mad. Can you kind of explain how that works? I think as Americans, like the idea of our government stepping in to help people learn how to forage seems quite foreign. So can you explain that relationship and what the benefits have been and maybe any learnings you have from that experience?
Yeah, for two governments now, so since 2018, and when I say two governments, there's been a shift in power. We've had support from the Danish government and specifically from the Danish Minister of Food. And what I love about this is that through conversation and through education, and I think this really goes to one of the spots where we all as citizens have an important role to play. The government has recognized the important role hospitality can play in helping the government meet their goals. So it might not be that someone sitting down the street at Parliament or in an office at the Ministry of Food knows precisely about the day-to-day of a chef's life, but we can help translate that. And then we can help them see how chefs across Denmark can help the nation make more sustainable food choices as a whole. So I think their support has been critical and been a really exciting piece of the work. And for me, a really good reminder, almost a call to action, if you will, that what government supports makes a difference. And I hope for more people to put environment on the top of their priority list when they're choosing what parties are in place across the globe as we go forward. That makes a difference. Probably we should be all aiming to spend as much time every week or more time on political activities every week as we do shopping online or looking at Instagram.
Yeah. And I think, getting into the kitchen too, as you pointed out, like agriculture and our food system generates around 1/3 of the total emissions. And it is something that I feel like, we have 3-ish choices a day to make on what we eat and what we choose to put on our plate, how we think about meal planning for our families and all of that.
And it seems obvious that the government would play a role in that, because that seems like such a huge lever to pull, both from working with the chefs, but also how to translate, as you talked about, sort of that trickle down in culture to what ends up on my plate when I'm cooking at home.
And look, I think many governments are in the challenging position, unfortunate position of needing to meet vested interests. We've asked a lot of farmers since World War II in terms of the type of equipment they adopt, the types of practices they adopt. And we probably have not done enough to support agriculture in transitioning to a regenerative future. So I think that's another spot that government can play a role more quickly and more effectively in the future.
This Stop at MAD isn't your first engagement with the sustainability of our food system. So you launched, I believe, or were the co-founder of the Yale Sustainable Food Project, done some stuff with the Highline. Can you talk a little bit about how your experience up to the point of getting to MAD has sort of informed your approach when you think about the environmental aspect of the work MAD does?
I appreciate this question so much. It made me stop and think. When I was at Yale, I've been incredibly fortunate at these different organizations to work with creative, visionary, and really practical, strategic people who want to make a difference. And what I reflect on most from my time at Yale, so Yale had, we were feeding 8,000 people a day there. My mandate was, as a 25-year-old, was to change the way the dining halls sourced their food, change the way we ate, and ideally become a model for sustainable food, at least in the state. Let's start there. And it was 2003, so it was early days. And what I learned there is change can be hard. Change is complex. We like what we already know. We are comfortable with what we already know. And so as we face this time in the world as managers or collaborators or simply as friends and family members, people need support. They need training as we change what counts as best practice. They need more conversation about how what we can do is going to add up, and they need a bit of inspiration and probably also some self-care along the way. And I think that was, for me, a big learning at Yale. There was this specific time where, this will sound maybe frivolous to your audience, but we were working with the bakers, and the bakers were responsible not just for making breakfast and dessert for 8,000 people every day, but for a lot of other locations on Yale's campus. And there were these pink frosting cookies that I thought had no place. They were like a raspberry pink frosting, full of Crisco, really sugary, not what I believed was the future of food, even though I think the future of food will have dessert in it, right? I love dessert. And what we hoped for was just a really delicious brownie made with flour, chocolate, well-sourced, eggs, butter. And that took an incredible amount of conversation. And it wasn't until talking with someone else, it was the author Harold McGee. We happened to have a conversation, and I said, but why are they so attached to the pink frosting? I was 25, 26. And he said, Melina, they probably have a skill there they're very proud of, right? Making pink frosting for 8,000 people is a skill. Making great frosting for a family is a skill. And it really helped me see that as we make change, we need to give moments to grieve the skills we're going to give up and moments to train on the skills and perspectives we need to adopt.
On this idea of skill, so one of the things that I was talking to Douglas about, which I was editing the episode yesterday, so it's all very fresh in my mind, is when I went to Silo, knowing that it was zero waste, but what really changed my mindset about how we think about the future of food and environmentalism as it relates to food is the sort of bread dish. You can see the flour mill in the corner, and they mill their own flour, and then you get the bread and butter, and it comes on a recycled plastic disc that's waste from the restaurant. And then at the end of the meal, you can get this ice cream sandwich that is made out of the same materials that were basically the offcuts, so to speak, of the original bread and butter. For me, that was like, it was delicious. It was inventive. It was creative. It really changed my mindset about how I think about food. Has there ever been a meal or an item that you've eaten that you just kind of, I don't know, blew your mind or changed the way you thought from an environmental lens about our food system?
I'll give you, that's such a good question. So I'll give you two moments. One, in terms of a really specific environmental moment. I was sitting at Yale. We had an acre that we were farming. I mean, it's a garden, it's display. But then I was sitting with two real farmers, right? People growing acres and acres of vegetables. And we all had been growing these mokum carrots, which is a variety encouraged by Elliot Coleman and great for fall growing. They do okay with slightly fewer hours of sunlight. And as winter comes, the sugars in them, if you let them freeze, if they're out in the field during frost, they become sweeter and sweeter. And in this moment, three farmers tasting carrots, same variety of carrots, grown in different soils, planted roughly at the same time. And the flavor was different. And that for me was just a wildly exciting moment to taste that difference. But then I would say, the other piece for me, my family never went to fancy restaurants. It was like a big deal to go out for Chinese takeout. And we did a lot of cooking. But when I had one of my first meals at restaurant Noma, for me, that was a time that I understood that food and, truly creative food is worthy of patronage like the arts. And I hadn't seen that before or understood it on a gut level before, but I just remember the click because I think we haven't treated food in that way before. And I think it's worth paying attention to as we go forward.
Amazing. And I want to end on an idea around inclusivity and diversity. So everybody's heard nature loves diversity. I think recently we've all started to see some ingredients come to the fore, like fanio, from West Africa, starting to be this highlighted ingredient. I'm, have this environmental bend. So I read people like Terry Tempest Williams and Robin Wall Kimmerer from outside of the food world. And then when I look into the food world, it tends to be pretty white and pretty male. And I'm saying that as a white male myself, that are leading this conversation around bringing more sustainable food systems to the fore. As someone who is connected to the industry, but maybe not running a restaurant, like, what is your perspective on how we bring more people into the conversation so that way that, not just white men are dominating the narrative?
First, it's by asking the question. Your question makes me think, okay, how often am I quoting Aldo Leopold versus Robin Kimmerer, who I think is an amazing thinker of this time and comes from an indigenous background and combines that so beautifully with science. So one is asking the question. Second, I would say I'd encourage anyone from your audience to go watch our Chito Guevara's talk at our second MAD symposium on appetite. It was a truly moving conversation that reminds you that my everyday, your everyday, it's not the everyday of everyone in the world. And we need to have a bigger perspective. And then I would say we need to build diversity and gender equality on all levels of society. When it comes specifically to women's voices at the table, though I think this research it would be interesting to look at the data in all areas of diversity. It turns out, if women are leading companies, those companies, and when I say leading companies on their executive boards, they're far more likely to invest in renewable energy and develop products that help solve the climate crisis. Women legislators vote for environmental protections almost twice as frequently as men. And so for the future's sake, for today's sake, we need that leadership. And then I think it's also a matter of creating platforms. If you're in Copenhagen in the middle of August 20th and 21st, we have two of our young alumni leading a pop-up they happen to be women. They weren't chosen for their gender, but providing them that platform makes a real difference. So I think we each can take an inventory of where we can help and go for it.
Thank you so much, Melina, for taking time to chat today. There's so many great references. I want to assure everybody listening, I will, in the show notes, we're going to link up all of these videos and books and all that other sort of good stuff. And I encourage everyone to download the Wild Food app. Check that out. We'll include a link for that as well. Is there anything else that MAD has coming up? You just mentioned the pop-up in August. Is there anything else you'd want to share before we wrap the episode?
I would encourage everyone to sign up for our newsletter. There's some very exciting activities in the next 18 months that we're not quite ready to talk about, but I think you'll want to be there.
Amazing. We'll include a link to that as well. Thanks again. We really appreciate it. And hopefully we will get to chat more soon.
Yeah, Rick, thank you so much.